The Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin. And tonight we have the second of our Abduction Roundtables. And tonight we will be featuring Debra Jordan-Kauble and Peter Robbins. And Debbie Jordan-Kauble was the central figure in Budd Hopkins' New York Times bestseller, Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods, and the 1992 CBS miniseries of the same name, starring Richard Crenna and Mare Winningham. To protect her family, she went by the pseudonym of Kathy Davis. After a lifetime of continued experiences, she wrote her own book, Extraordinary Contact: Life Beyond Intruders, to share her journey with others who have been affected by the phenomenon. She is a wife, mother to 4, and grandmother to 8. She lives in Kokomo, Indiana, is a retired automotive industry worker, a licensed cosmetologist, a member of Mensa, the Authors Guild, and the American Red Cross. Peter Robbins is an investigative writer, best-selling author, and lecturer, well known for his UFO-related papers, columns, articles, editorials, commentaries, and talks. He is a regular fixture on talk radio and podcasts, and has appeared as a guest on and a consultant to numerous television programs and documentaries. He is host of the weekly radio show / podcast, Meanwhile Here on Earth, Monday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Peter has spoken at venues all over the country and in several countries around the world. Robbins was a founding member of Budd Hopkins' Intruders Foundation and served as executive assistant to Mr. Hopkins. He has written for Open Minds magazine, Fate, Phenomena, UFO Data magazine, UFO Matrix, UFO Magazine, both UK and US editions, Outer Limits magazine, and numerous other publications. Peter has been an advisor, consultant, and co-founder to numerous UFO festivals and conferences around the world. Peter was invited to give testimony at the Citizens' Hearings on Disclosure at the National Press Club. Peter is an associate producer of the award-winning documentary Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton, and most recently, the producer/writer of the documentary The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death of James Forrestal. He works and lives in the countryside just outside of Ithaca, New York. Welcome to the show, Debra Jordan-Kauble, and welcome back, my friend Peter Robbins, to Inside the Fringe.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. So let's go ahead and start off and see who is in our chat today. Aaron Baker is here. Hello. Loki is here. Greetings. And we will go ahead and just get right into it as soon as I take that banner off. Debra, I was curious, could you give us a brief outline of your experiences as a young woman before you met Budd? What did you remember consciously of your younger days?
Well, I remembered The most particular one that stands out to me is right after I was just married. I was a young married. I was 18, just 18 years old. And I was in bed with my husband. We'd gone to bed and he was sound asleep. And two of these gray guys, is what I called them, gray guys, were suddenly in my bedroom. I remembered I was sitting up in bed and I felt terrified. And I remember thinking, don't touch me, please. Don't come any closer to me. And I just was full of terror. I couldn't move. I couldn't run. And then I don't know what happened, but suddenly I was no longer afraid, still sitting there, and noticed that one of them had a black box in his hand that floated over to me. And I asked, could I have this box? Could I keep it? And they said no, but that when I saw it again, I would know what it was for and how to use it. And then they took the box back and they went away. As soon as they were gone, I could move, and I tried to wake my husband up and tell him, oh my God, you're not going to believe, what just happened. But I couldn't get him to wake up. And I just slid back down the bed and I fell asleep. The next morning, though, when I woke up, I still remembered it, and I was still really like supercharged by it. And I tried telling him about it, and only thing he would say to me was, what did you eat for dinner the night before? What'd you have for supper? That he thought I had a nightmare or something. And I'm like, no, this was not a dream. I was awake. This really happened. And I called my mother. And years later, the first time Budd came to our house to interview everybody after the June 30th, 1983 incident, one of the things that Budd asked my mom, do you remember other weird stuff? And she's like, well, I remember the morning she called me. And she remembered that I had called her and told her these two gray guys were in the bedroom, and I was flipping out and I couldn't get Charlie to wake up. And, after you tell your family member something for a minute and then they kind of roll their eyes at you, I just quit talking about it. But that was that was a thing that I remembered consciously. And then I remembered pieces of it consciously but I was very young. I was only about 6 years old when my sister took me to Detroit for an overnight visit. The girl that she used to hang out with on our street, her grandparents lived on the corner, and she would come down from Michigan and stay with her grandparents, and that's when she'd hang out with my sister. She also had a younger sister my age whom I would play with. So when Kathy finally got her driver's license and she could drive, she was given the okay by my parents to take me up to Detroit and visit for the day. And at some point during that visit, I came up missing. And the only thing I remember about missing is I remember kicking a ball over the fence and then suddenly realizing that I was lost. Then I remember going into a house that I thought was the house I was supposed to be at. And when I realized it might not be, feeling afraid and trying to leave, but that there was a little boy that stopped me and asked me if I could play and if I would play with him. He had really cool toys. And I said yes. And I became, suddenly was not afraid of him. And I remembered the toy room didn't look anything like the rest of the house. And the next thing I remember is trying to leave. Something scared me and I was trying to leave. And I remember who I thought was maybe his mother came out from somewhere, and she was really angry that I was in the house. And she said something to the effect of, what is she doing here? She doesn't belong here. She needs to leave now. And bam, remember, I felt like I'd been pushed out the door. But when I looked down the sidewalk to the pathway to the sidewalk, there stood my older sister. So I immediately remember feeling, okay, I'm not afraid anymore. There's my sister, feeling relief. And I remember taking her hand and walking back to where we were supposed to go. And that was the end of the ordeal and the trip. And I didn't recall anything else. Didn't recall her saying anything to me. Just recalled bits and pieces of it. And again, Budd was at our house during the first time or two he came out to start the investigation of our family and our experiences. And he had asked my mother, did anything strange ever happen to her when she was little? Right away, my mom and my older sister start telling him about how I was missing this day, and then I started thinking, oh, I do remember, but I was only 6. So a lot of some of the story about people, I don't even remember what they said. They had the police out looking for me and everything, but I don't recall that. I just remember my sister finding me. And Mom said they told her that Kathy had gone out with a bunch of, everybody went spread out to find me. And Kathy's the one who found me and brought me back. So, these are things that I've always had remembered and had happened to me. But they were just kind of in the shelf in the back of my brain, because you just take those weird things and set them aside because they don't really fit in, everyday world. But then when Budd came, he has this way of just asking the right questions, and it just, all the memories started coming back.
Sure. And I have a question about the boy that you mentioned, and his mother, who said, "What is she doing here? She's not supposed to be here." Did this turn out not to be a house after all?
I don't know. I do not know, because I remember thinking it was a house and walking into it and leaving. And as far as my conscious memory is, the woman was human and the little boy was human. He seemed about my age and stuff. So honestly, I can't say for sure. I don't know.
And the experience that you had with the 3 boys, only one of whom spoke, that's a different situation entirely.
That's a totally different. That was, I was 15 or something like that. And I had gone to Rough River State Park in Kentucky with my BFF, who is still my BFF. We've been friends for over 50 years and still talk every day. But I used to go down there with her family all the time. And I was down there with them on one of the camping trips when we encountered these 3 boys. These, the 2 who never spoke looked like twins to me. They were taller, they were thinner, they had dark hair, dark eyes. They stayed back, kind of in the background. The one who did all the talking was that he was shorter, and I didn't know this at the time, but everybody later told me and told Budd that he looked like the male version of me. Like he and I could be brother and sister. We looked so much alike. And I had such a mad little crush on him when I saw him, because I thought he was cute. And, I had boy on the brain back then. So
sure.
But that was a whole different experience. Mm-hmm. And there were several witnesses to this whole. My girlfriend, her 3 brothers, her mom, her dad, and I think maybe her uncle. We were all there at the cabin. Well, we called it a cabin. It was actually a trailer, but we called it a cabin.
Yeah, a trailer sounds more exotic, I guess.
I don't know. Cabin sounds
cabin.
Nicer.
Yeah. I wanted to mention, right off the bat, so to speak, that Deb is going to very generously offer for our weekly giveaway today autographed copy of her book, Extraordinary Contact, Life Beyond Intruders. And thank you for that generous giveaway for our lucky winner this
You're
week.
I hope whoever it is enjoys it.
Oh, I'm sure that they will. What can you tell us about this book?
Well, in this book, I start out with the June 30, 83 incident in my own words, 38 years later. But then within this book is how I kind of transformed through the years from that terrified, almost unable to function 23-year-old and got through to now I'm going to be 63 in a couple weeks, and how I got through these many years and how how I've evolved and how I've learned to live with this and how I've learned to to take these experiences and make myself, make myself a better person and stronger. And, there's a lot of paranormal experiences that it had in there. How there's information in there about how I transitioned from being a MUFON investigator for 10 years in UFOs to being a paranormal investigator and getting involved, especially with EVPs and near the end of the book, I try to just hope that I was able to have contributed something that somebody read somewhere in this book that helps them on their journey, and to let people like me out there know they're not alone. And I don't think they're crazy any more than I thought I used to think I was too. So I understand how that feels. And I want people to feel more comfortable coming forward and talking about it. I started out with a pseudonym in Intruders because my children were little. It was a different time and the world was different and the attitude was different than it is now. But and then there's still a lot of stigma attached to, especially people who report contact with another kind of a life form. It's getting almost to the point now where people think it's kind of cool to see a UFO, and you don't get that giggle factor you used to, but there's still a lot of stigma attached to it. And especially for military people and, air pilots and things like that. And so it's my hope that this is my little contribution to hopefully helping the stigma go away and letting people feel that more accepting of this whole thing.
Peter, what is your recollection of your first meeting with Deb, or your first knowledge of her case?
Budd had talked about this woman who had written to him and he was corresponding with, and that he felt the case, and I have to catch myself right there, even after all these years in this field, you use a word like case, which is incredibly dispassionate, technical, the right word to use in many instances, but we're talking about people's lives here. And in many cases, the most memorable, life-changing, upsetting, transcendent, terrifying, wonderful moments that people go through. Deb came out to New York on the Greyhound and attended one of our support group meetings. I had the privilege of being at almost all of them as the only other non-UFO abductee aside from Budd, in my capacity as his assistant. And my sister Helen, though, was a member of that meeting, and we all met then. We immediately connected and have stayed very connected ever since. She was freaked out, as anybody would be who had been through this, and all of a sudden is in a room full of other people alleging to have similar experiences, when you've been kind of going on your own on this, or maybe, with reference to a family member or two. And again, was by Budd's side, allegorically or actually, over the years that he continued to develop the material that went on to become the book, and then ultimately a version of it, the miniseries. But just listening to Deb talk the last minutes, so many thoughts were going through my mind. And one of them is that, as we were talking about before this show, just the idea of being taken by these beings who are obviously associated with at least one kind of unidentified flying object, unidentified aerial phenomena, whatever you want to call it, is so untenable, is so outrageous, is so off the charts that I just based on experience and understanding something about human nature, there are certainly people listening and watching this broadcast who are thinking, she seems really nice and she's smart and articulate and obviously believes what she's saying. But of course, this couldn't happen because this is nuts. People aren't taken by UFOs. We don't know about it. Whatever we tell ourselves, it is real, and it does happen. And it has happened to more people than any of us, I think, can even fully imagine. There are no hard stats, but I think everybody knows at least one person that this has happened to, which in itself is kind of an outrageous statement. Also, the other thing, Deb was talking about certain experiences and memories, situations, that lost child syndrome, where you're there and then you're not there, and then you're there again. And sometimes that experience is accompanied by a mark on your body that wasn't there when you left, and that there's no discernible way of figuring out how it happened, and becomes a permanent scar and often cauterizes as it happens.
This would be the ubiquitous scoop mark.
Yes, correct. And that these are all components of the story. Obviously, Deb hasn't spoken at all yet about actual, the story within the story, the core story that is the bright, shiny object that so many people are fascinated by at the center of every abduction story, of memories of being on board, of associated experiences, of meeting other people that you share experiences with, and then the actual, real, yes, hard, physical, three-dimensional, court-worthy evidence that would swing an actual jury if such things were decided in courts of law. Physical evidences, historic evidences within the same family, multiple witnessing within a neighborhood or a family, physiological changes to organic material, for example, where a craft sets down, conditions that can occur to individuals, unexplainable in other terms other than its association with the alleged experience, that otherwise make no sense physiologically or physically. Or a pet can become very ill and die. One can, again, if your logical mind is raging against these possibilities, you're going to keep coming up with stuff. And I think Deb understands that better than most people. I know I do, as somebody that has not had it happen, but has seen more real evidence and more patterning across more cases, across years and locations and socioeconomic groups and background and religion and family backgrounds, that I no longer have the luxury of disbelief. Obviously, if something happens to you and you know it is happening in the three-dimensional actual world that you're living in, the word belief is a silly one to try to apply. It's like saying, do we believe in the chairs we are sitting in? Well, do we? But it's not about belief. We're sitting in chairs, they're here. And if they weren't, our heads would be down on the floor because we wouldn't have a chair. But all of these things come to mind in reconnecting with Deb here. And I think the book is wonderful. Within the world of UFO literature, there is a growing area of books by abductees and experiencers about their experiences. And that's not to negate fine work being done by investigators, researchers, writers, authors about people's experiences. But firsthand is firsthand. And Deb has become a very good writer, very good at telling her own story. Thank you very much. And I'm biased because I'm crazy about her, because I think she has tremendous courage, because I've kind of followed the story of the book as it's developed over the years, and because I had the honor of writing the afterword for this volume, which I'm very proud of.
I felt you know, I just felt like it was important to tell my story, for me to tell my story, and you mentioned all the physical evidence. I still get annoyed when I hear people that I have no problem with skeptics. I felt like I was a skeptic person myself.
We have to be skeptics. Nothing wrong with it.
That's normal and healthy. I did everything I knew to do to figure out what was going on. I tried looking, I called the agricultural state for the agricultural agent for the state of Indiana. I called the college. I called the gas company. When this June 30, 83 incident happened, that was the central incident in Intruders. And that was like the pivotal incident in my life that really turned everything into a whole different direction. But, so I did everything I could possibly do to try to figure out what caused this. I kept telling myself, oh, you couldn't, this couldn't have happened. You couldn't have seen this stuff in the yard. You couldn't have been hit with this light, because this doesn't even happen, And even later, when I had so much physical problems with my eyes, first, I didn't tell the doctors in the emergency room because I didn't even remember it at that point. And once I did remember it later, I didn't know what to tell doctors and figured they would think I was crazy. And now here we are, I was 23 when that happened. And now by the time I was in my late 30s, I was diagnosed with macular degeneration and cataracts, which is unusual for somebody that young. I blame that night and that damage to my eyes. My dog, who had been out there with me that night, within I'm going to say maybe 6 weeks, we ended up having to put her to sleep because her hair fell out. At first we thought it was mange, what mange looks like. But then it started coming off everywhere. Her teeth would be in the food bowl. Her eyes started whiting over, and she got very sick. Big black sores developed all over her upper back, and we ended up having to put her down. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking to myself, okay, she was out there that night. Is that going to happen to me one day because I was near this, So, and then the mark in the yard that lasted for 2 years, snow melted off of it the first year. Yeah. Nothing would grow on it. I get so angry when I hear skeptics, debunkers, I should say, there's no physical evidence. Excuse me. Have you met me? Have you seen my yard? Can you, come out and talk to the two independent witnesses that lived on either side of the house, or the one 20 years later who came forward that lived behind us, who wrote to Budd after Intruders was already out and told him of something that happened around that night with the balls of light. There's a lot of evidence with this case. And as hard as I wanted to make myself think it was all me and not I was going crazy, that it wasn't working. It wasn't going to work this time.
Well, let's remember again, being a skeptic is a healthy, natural thing. And especially if you've had these kinds of experiences, or you professionally are involved in examining them and investigating them, you really do need to be as careful and as untrusting on a certain, Darwinian level as possible as you examine the situation. That's fine. And I, like Deb, have no problem with skeptics or skepticism. Debunkers are something else again. They have the intellectual arrogance to know that these things don't happen, that truly anomalous UFOs simply do not exist except in the imaginations of new age goofballs like us who walk around, in our own little worlds thinking that science fiction is real. How incredibly insulting to purport that that the unknown doesn't exist or is known. And how? Well, I'll figure it out and I'll let you know when I do. In the meantime, here's a bunch of pseudoscientific nonsense to waylay you for the moment, and it would be funny if it weren't so insulting.
Yeah. Peter, one thing that has been a thorn in my side is that Carl Sagan was sort of my childhood hero. And as I grew to understand more about the UFO phenomenon and the abduction phenomenon, the more I realized that his, I believe, 14 articles in Parade magazine having to do not with astronomy, but with about communicating to the largest possible audience that these things do not happen and cannot happen, the more I realized he was getting paid by somebody to look like the obviously very knowledgeable person that he was, but when he kind of poo-pooed all of the evidence without, I think, looking at any of it, or maybe even he did know what was going on, but was just paid by the government, I presume, to be a debunker. I felt my heart drop. He's still one of my heroes, but not because of his work on UFOs and abductions.
He was much more courageous in his thinking about such subjects before he was Carl Sagan, the most beloved and best known official scientist in America, in great part because of the tremendous popularity of his long-running PBS television series, Cosmos. As you probably know, Carl lived and worked very close to where I live now, up until his death, I think in 1997 of cancer. I have no idea whether Carl was in the pay of any agency or office of the government or otherwise, but like so many establishment figures, whether it's in science or politics or other areas of human endeavor where your reputation can really affect your career. He was a victim of his own derogatory thinking on the subject in a way. He did not want to be ridiculed, and I think that he took the subject quite seriously privately, but would have been horrified if anybody found out, because then, oh, Carl Sagan, you believe in flying saucers and little green men, and I used to think you were a serious scientist. It was another time. I can tell you, though, from my own experience, that I do remember when Budd Hopkins and he appeared on a television show together in New York. And after the show, they were chatting. They certainly got along personally. And Budd invited Carl back to his home and studio and said, if you will come for a visit, I will open my files completely to you with every aspect of evidence. Make, as a professional colleague who I would love to take seriously, I will, open this to you, and you can see how real it is. Cases like Deb's, for example. And he declined, whatever the excuse was, and Budd did not let it go. He actually said, if I have a case that comes to me that is for me gilt-edged, as real as any I have dealt with every earmark and all the kind of proofs that I would look for, in your area, would you then be interested in meeting with this individual? And he said, yes, he would. And more than a year passed before this individual, and I met him several times, came to spend time with Budd, and holy shit, I mean, he was absolutely as real as they get. A very rough history of, well, I'll leave it at that for now. And when Budd did contact um, Dr. Sagan up in Ithaca, um, not only was this the case, but that this young man's father was also a professor at Cornell University and a colleague of Sagan's, although he's in another department, he didn't work with him, but a colleague in terms of being on the faculty together. And Sagan refused, even though he had agreed to, yes, if you find somebody in my area, and here's somebody who had all the credentials, who came from a family that Carl knew, he refused. Make of it what you will, but I remember how disappointed I was, especially because this young man really could have used some validation with somebody who he looked up to.
Thank you, Peter, for relating that. That's something I did not know, and really is a kind of an eye opener and a gut punch at the same time. And I think that it further ramifies my belief. I obviously can't prove that he was a paid shill or what have you, but it certainly makes me think that my position on that has more weight to it. Another question for you, Peter. In what ways does Deb's case differ from the thousands of other cases that have been collected?
Oh gosh, how does it differ? Well, number one, she did something that the great majority of people who have these experiences are reticent to do, which is come forward. And not just to come forward, but to work with a respected investigator, knowledgeable in the subject, to make her most private, life-shattering story the account of her life and how this phenomena has woven its way through it to bring it into the public realm. That in itself differentiates Deb from most people, the great majority of people that have these experiences that are not looking for attention on it. And it may sound like I'm playing games with words here. I am not. I never had the feeling that Deb White-Kauble has ever had some big thrill about having attention drawn to her in this respect or becoming well known in an international way because of these experiences. I think like Travis Walton, excuse me, a mutual friend and colleague and God knows UFO abduction experiencer, that on a certain level, and I'd like to hear from Deb on this after I say this, that you feel a certain social obligation to talk about what happened to you, what you remembered, make it real to other people. And the first person I ever saw do this on a regular basis was my late sister, Helen. And her experience and her sharing it with me was how I became so interested and involved in the subject.
40 years ago or so when this happened, I reached out to Budd. I still can't believe it's been that long ago, but
yeah.
My intention of reaching out to Budd was just to not go crazy. I was that desperate for help.
Yeah.
And beginning to put two and two together with the June 30, 83 incident, all the other stuff in my life, stuff that had happened to my sister, and I couldn't function. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. And, when I had read I tried to read Missing Time and saw that I could write to Budd in that book, I did something I'd never done in my life, and that was reach out to a stranger to write to somebody who had written a book, for help. And once I met him, and we started he started his investigation. He also, did so many things to help me, set me up with a buddy system. And, and I met people like Kellen and Peter, and they were all there and supportive. And he also, I don't know if he got people to donate either money or time for testing. I know one time when I went to New York, I had a CAT scan and I had an EEG of my brain, and I had verbal and written psychological testing, and he took me to see Dr. Clamar, the psychiatrist. He did everything. Budd was an artist. He wasn't a professional UFO investigator or anything else. He was an artist, but he was a compassionate man who felt somehow driven to this subject, and I felt compelled to reach out to him. So everything combined, when he started to think maybe this could be or should be a book, I thought, and he approached us with it. Our initial reaction was, I don't think so. No, that, in my mind, I'm thinking, who the hell wants to be famous for this shit? Not me. I just want a normal life. That's all I've ever wanted. I've spent a good majority of my life trying to be invisible. That's how I feel most comfortable, And so we agreed to the book. And at that point, I had felt so much better, and I was doing so much better. And it had really made a difference in my life, being with him and what he had done to help me. And also I felt blessed to have found him, and fortunate that I had so much time with him. And he sacrificed a lot of his family time. He used his own money, because I was broke. I had to sell my washer and dryer for my first bus ticket to New York that I had in storage, that I put in storage after I moved back home with my parents. I was a single mom with 2 kids and trying to figure out how I was going to, make it in this world on top of all this weird stuff. So, when he wrote the book, and then of course the publishing company wants you to go on a press junket and all that stuff, that's how it was done back then. And he asked me if I would come with him when he did a few things, and when he would speak in public, and I didn't really want to, because I was very shy, and I didn't like people looking at me. I was a fat girl my whole life, so I always tried to, didn't want to be the center of anybody's attention. But I did it for him. I did it for Budd, because he had sacrificed so much for me, and I felt like I almost felt obligated to. I wanted to help him, and I certainly. The reason we finally agreed to the book Intruders was because we were convinced that it was going to help other people, that there were a lot of other people like us out there. And so, people, you'd say, you're so brave. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't know whether I'm brave or crazy, because this is not comfortable. The first time I ever got on stage with him, I can't remember where it was. I almost fainted. And I remember looking at this room full of people, and Budd had whispered in my ear. He had whispered to me, don't forget, these people are here because they want to hear your story. They're your friend, basically, because I was literally physically shaking. And I just told him, you know what, give me a minute to get my breath, because I think I'm about to pass out, because I'm really scared. And the people in that room, they gave me a standing ovation. They were so kind and so, so supportive of me. And so, from that point on, I did what I did with him to help other people. I can tell you right now, I believe in my whole heart that for every one person out there like me who has a story to tell, and some people's stories are way, way, way wilder than mine, because I've heard them. For everyone like me, I bet you there's 50,000 people out there sitting on stories just like mine who are not going to say a word. And if one of them hears me and sees that I don't care what people think of me anymore. There's one great thing about getting old with age, is that you get to a point where you just really don't give a shit what people think about you anymore. If you don't want to believe me, I don't care. Don't. I didn't want to believe it either. I told the psychiatrist in New York, it's okay if I'm crazy. You can tell me I'm crazy because I know they make pills for that, and it'll just make all this shit go away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know, so I don't care what people think anymore. And if the people that I care about, I already know what they think, and they've been there with me. They know. So,
and that rings a strong bell for me. More than one person that I had the privilege of spending time with in the years that I worked as Bud's assistant, and to a degree since then occasionally, but especially back in the day, more 80s and 90s, approached Bud in great part to have him somehow validate the fact that they had some kind of mental problem, and that perhaps he could refer them to a mental health professional or psychiatrist who could diagnose it and then prescribe whatever meds are necessary so it would go away. Not to do what he ended up doing so well, which was go in the other direction and do the research to establish, in fact, that this did happen. This is real, and it has happened to you.
It's better if I'm crazy because they can cure crazy.
And because there are lots of people in the world who've been crazy, and that's not crazy. People are crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
But being allegedly taken away by aliens, no, that's not crazy. That's nuts. That's over the
fucking
top. That's
terrifying.
Completely, exactly. Except that it's not. It's just as real things happen to be, unless it's not happened to you, and you can't even think about it seriously. Because if it's true, if this has happened to Deb White-Kauble and to so many other people, and you actually understand that and are able to evaluate the evidence being presented in its case, in its support, that means that you may have to face a moment in your life where everything that you thought you understood, knew, or accepted about the universe and the world that you live in and the nature of life is now open to question. And frankly, I'd rather call Deb a liar, or nuts, or an attention seeker, or a mystic, or somebody who is, hungry for publicity and, some weird obsessive extrovert, because I can live with that. I don't care if she's got a problem with it, but anything other than that she's telling the truth, because then I've got a problem.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are just afraid. I mean, and I think sometimes people come at me with some ridiculous shit because, like you said, what I'm trying to share with them challenges their whole way of thinking,
reality.
their entire world. And I've already been that route. I know how it feels to have your brain try to stretch over a reality that keeps moving the goalposts, I know how that feels.
That's a good way to put it.
So I understand. And I understand it when people, have a hard time. I don't have, if they don't want to believe me, that's okay. I understand. If I hadn't seen some of the things that I've seen, and especially have people with me, I probably would question it too. I think that would be the normal way to react. So I don't have a problem with that at all. And I don't feel compelled to try to talk people into believing my story. I'm going to tell you what I remember. And I'll tell you the facts as I remember them. And then if you want, I'll tell you my opinion, and I'll tell you what I think, because I don't know a whole lot, but then from then on, it's up to you to figure out what a part of that you can take and what you can't. It's on you then. But because I have to say, I probably one of the few people, well, I can't say that. I've met other people like me, but I don't ever remember going into a ship or coming out of a ship. So I'm not sure where I'm at when I have these memories. You know what I mean? Like, I don't remember walking through a door to go in somewhere.
Right.
I'm just there.
Yeah.
And then I'm home. I don't know if my mind blacks out or it's intentionally turned off during this time. I'm not sure.
Right.
So I always try to make people understand that too. Even when I saw that craft thing in the backyard on June 30th, 1983, that thing wasn't much bigger than the pump house of the swimming pool, which was probably the size of a mini barn that you can get at Lowe's department store or something. It wasn't big. Then I saw 6 what I thought were children in the backyard moving around and moved down towards this thing. In retrospect, common sense tells me, at least in this reality, 6 of anybody, even kids, can't get in this thing and fly somewhere a million miles away. That just doesn't make sense. So I'm not sure what it was I saw. I use the term craft for lack of a better term, for descriptive purposes, but I don't know what it was. And I just don't see how even 6 little kid-sized people could fly anywhere in that thing. So I don't know what it was. But
unless it were bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
That just like the weird toy room, when I went into that toy room, it just didn't seem like it really was a part of the house that I was in. It just something didn't make sense, but I don't know. I think that I think our reality is what we see with our brains and our eyes and our ears, is just a tiny little slice of the pie of life that's all around us. And I think that this stuff is in that other big hunk of pie that we don't see consciously, or we're not capable of seeing most of the time. I don't know. That's just my brain trying to figure things. I'm still trying to figure things out 50 years later.
That may be closer to the truth. I'm going to ask this question of both of you, but I want to start with Deb. How did you feel about your story in Intruders becoming a New York Times bestseller?
I told you we went through the whole thing with Budd. We didn't really want a book. That's not what we wanted that's not what I wanted when I reached out to him, but we eventually agreed to it. And I was surprised. I was surprised that it was a New York Times bestseller. I was happy because that meant that more people would be reading it, and that more people would learn of our story, which meant more people maybe I could help by them hearing about our story. So I was happy about that part.
Peter, same question.
I was very excited, very proud of Budd, in part as a reader, as a book lover, as a writer. In the history of UFO-related literature, the tiniest percentage of books have ever made bestseller lists here and abroad. There are so many UFO books that come out, from the sublime to the ridiculous. And, most of them are small presses or privately published. But in 1987, the fact that this book made the New York Times bestseller list.
Isn't that the same year that Whitley Strieber's first book came out, Communion?
His first book on UFOs, Communion, also made the bestseller list here and abroad. It was very exciting. A lot of us in the field felt, by virtue of just the fact that we were involved in this area of study, that it was something of a validation, even if, reviews were critical at times. That book changed things. And again, I guess it's harder for Deb than anybody to look at it in a completely objective, dispassionate way. I can do it a little better because it didn't happen to me, but it happened to somebody that I loved, to a very real American family. And the thing that I wanted to drive home here is that, objectively speaking as I can, It's one of the finest single freestanding case histories of a UFO abduction incident, its ramifications in the life of a young woman and her family, that has ever been published. It's an incredibly important book. Also, Budd, who was self-trained as an investigative writer, and brilliantly so. I mean, I used to joke with him sometimes that if he had gone into law enforcement instead of the arts, God help the criminals of New York City, he would have been an incredible detective. He was an incredible detective, in fact, but he was also a really, really good writer. And he knew how to dot every I. So I recommend this book without reservation. And now that we have Deb's own memoir of this same period, anybody that's interested in this subject and wants to hone in or recommend reading to somebody that they care about who may be more skeptical than them, but is looking to learn more or find an avenue that they can move forward on to take the subject more seriously, this is an amazing pair of books to be able to have the opportunity to read. They're mirrors of each other, and they tell two parts of the same story, but looking at it through different facets of the diamond, if you follow my lead. Anyway, yeah, the long answer to your short question of how I felt when the book became the bestseller was terrific. My friend had written a best-selling book, and that is an awesome thing.
Yeah, you must have felt elated. Debra, although the miniseries Intruders tied up the story at the end, yours continued. What can you tell us about your contact experiences post-Intruders?
Well, I didn't have very many what I would call like physical contact after that. I do recall one either right after or right before I had my hysterectomy, and it was when I moved up here back in the early 90s. And I was actually with my late husband and our house guest and her daughter when we had some kind of weird flashing light outside. I may have even just had my surgery. I think I was like laying on the couch in my house coat at the time, looking out the window, and it was me that saw the light first, and I pointed it out to everyone. We all ended up running out there. So, I mean, that was like probably the last time I had any physical or, any kind of contact like that, up until around the early 2000s, like maybe 2006. I had, my husband killed himself in 1994. And that was a very traumatic time for me because I witnessed it. And I backed out of life, and I didn't want to have anything to do with any of this. I was trying to recover from that and trying to keep myself together because I had 2 teenagers to raise by myself.
I can't personally imagine a more traumatic experience than seeing your spouse commit suicide in front of you.
It was horrible, but I got through it. But I didn't, I didn't want to have to deal with this weird stuff on top of all of that. And other than paranormal stuff, I mean, right after he died, I had several things happen with him. And it wasn't just me who witnessed it. It was my house full of people who had come up with me. Even something happened down in Florida with one of our friends, and she called me up and said I heard his voice in our room, in my utility room, playing with the dogs. And he said to me to tell you that he loved you. So I'm calling you. And I'm like, she didn't know he died the night before, or the evening before. And I told her, oh my God, he died. And I told her what happened, and she broke down. So, I mean, things were happening to other people, not just me. And then that's when I kind of started turning more to the paranormal stuff. And in 2006, I witnessed what they used to call around here O-balls, orange balls of light.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first thing I'd seen, like quote unquote UFO wise for quite a while. And so I got kind of obsessed with it, and I bought myself a really good camcorder, and I was out trying to videotape them at night. And one night when I was out trying to videotape, and I actually saw them, but then the jets from Grissom started to fly in. That's the air base here by me, Air Force Base. And I ended up having to go home, but I kept feeling like I was going to miss something. And I ran back out to the end of our driveway with my camcorder, and I was recording in the area. And you can hear all of a sudden all the animals even like the wild coyotes and stuff started howling. You can hear it on the videotape, but you couldn't see anything because it was dark out. And then at like 10:25, I went right back in the house, sat down at my desk and started to write. And there was this huge explosion, which ended up being the Kokomo boom. And like 149 people called the police to report this explosion. Some people reported seeing an explosion in the sky, and it shook several counties. And I was a witness to it. There was a bright orange yellow flash in my office, and then a big thump on my roof. And I thought that the jets that I had seen crisscrossing just 30 minutes earlier had crashed, and that the thump on my roof was a pilot who had jettisoned so I ran outside in my nightgown looking for a parachute and a pilot laying in my yard. Then my son was a cab driver, worked that night. He called me and said, "Mama, you guys all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he said, "We were just pulled off the road. They just pulled all the cabs off the road. There's been a plane crash." And I'm like, "You're kidding me." So I went back upstairs and I went to the police scanner app, and I had 6 hours of recording, and some real crazy stuff happened. As it turns out, MUFON convinced me to rejoin them and be the investigator on this case with the STAR team member. So I did. So I was one of the main investigators on this Kokomo boom case for MUFON, and one of the witnesses on top of that. And then I got sucked back in. There's a time when I just wanted everything to leave me alone and stop, go away. I just want my life to be normal. And every time I've done that, something has happened and sucked me right back into it. So I got back into that MUFON with the boom, and then I started getting interested in the paranormal, especially EVPs, after the things that happened with my late husband. And then my mom passed away, and something happened with my mom. And so I'm like hooked on the paranormal stuff now. And I learned a lot of things with that too. And my mind has expanded more. And I started having more what they call like lucid dreams, or, the vivid dreams that I've written down. Just, things like that have been going on since then. And yeah, it's been interesting, weird. I haven't seen any lights I have seen lights in the sky, but now I see them. I can tell the difference between a satellite and a weird light, because a satellite moves at a certain pace in a certain direction, and I have an app that'll tell me which one is which.
You're one up on Stephen Greer.
But but then when you see a light that kind of moves like a satellite, but then when it gets right overhead, it stops, and then it makes like a right angle turn and shoots off in another direction. It's like, wait a minute. I don't think satellites do that. I don't think comets can make right angle turns. So that was something weird. I see that a lot because I look up. And I think that if people spent more time looking up, they would see a lot too. But, because of who I am and what I've been through, I tend to look up a lot.
I just last night watched the Netflix movie Don't Look Up.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, yeah.
You've both seen that?
Yep.
Yes.
I have.
I guess that's all that needs to be said. So Deb, how have these experiences changed your life, and are they ongoing?
Well, like I said, I have strange little things happen a lot, but I'm don't have the fear that I used to have when I was younger. For one thing, that's changed, um, and I I don't. I, I've something has happened in my mind where my mind is kind of expanded. Like I said earlier, my mind is constantly trying to stretch over goalposts that are moving, and so I'm not a scientist by any means, and I'm not I don't even I'm not even good with math. I might be in Mensa, but I can tell you I didn't balance my checkbook right until I was
They
35
didn't
years
have
old.
a math test for Mensa.
Yeah, I had to take a little bit of math for that, but I think it's didn't interest me very much. Maybe that's why, but um I started thinking about things in a different way. I started dreaming in 3D. I started dreaming in color. I started taking things apart in my head. I had a dream not too long ago about black holes and about matter coming in and going out of black holes. And I drew this picture to try to describe it. So I'm doing kind of stuff like that, and then I had drawn a picture of what I called bubbles. And then I had this realization that the bubbles represented universes, and that where they touched, those little places where a soap bubble kind of touches and becomes one with the other soap bubble for a minute till it kind of slides away. Well, that's the way universes bounce off each other every once in a while. And where they touch, there can be communication or transferring back and forth. And I don't know why, but I got this thought in my head that there's people right here in this planet, in this plane or whatever this of existence, that are aware of them over there in another one of those bubbles. And there are people over there that are aware of us, and they're working together somehow to communicate. And I don't know why I feel that, but
It reminds me of the television show Counterpart. Have you seen that?
uh-uh.
I think you'd really enjoy it.
What's it called?
Counterpart. It has J.K. Simmons in it, and it only went 2 seasons. And I'm sure you can find it on Amazon Prime, and if not, Netflix.
I'll have to check it out.
I think it's an Amazon Prime show.
My attitude about all stuff like that is, even with like crop circles, like a lot of people think now that all the crop circles are done by people. Well, maybe that's so. I don't know. I think there's some physical changes to some of the crops in a few of those crop circles that I believe they're not human. But even the ones that are done, that are really well done, that are humanly done, something put that design in their head. Something put that design in their head, just like something put the design in my head that I drew for that year after June 30, 83. There's a bigger force at work here, and I'm beginning to become aware of it as I age and as I work through each of these, periods of strangeness in my life.
And Teddy Zink from the chat says, that is really interesting, Debra. You definitely have some awesome stories. And of course, they're not just stories. Peter, what are some things that you remember about Deb's case insofar as its inclusion in Budd's book and in the movie Intruders that stand out that you haven't talked about during the show so far?
Well, one of them falls in the realm of what we would call trace cases, where, and this is an area of study within the greater field of UFO studies, like so many areas of history and science, it breaks down into specialties and subsets. And this is when alleged paranormal activity comes in contact with physical material and causes a change, and sometimes a profound change to the structure, appearance, behavior of something physical that is unexplainable in any other way. The night that the main event, for lack of a better term, happened for Deb, a craft of undetermined origin touched down in her backyard. And where it sat, in very non-technical terms, fucking fried the soil. It came skidding in, and that skid mark, and then that more substantial, end mark at the end of the skid, the soil stopped behaving like it should have, like it used to. It lost the ability to hold and maintain any kind of moisture. It was the first area where snow would melt in the winter, and there are some very dramatic photographs to that effect. As I recall, it was more than a year and a half before it began to come back. When such materials are tested in laboratory, it's not like you get some science fiction, oh my God, here's element whatever from, the planet Xenu that we don't have on Earth, and, it proves everything that we thought. It's not like that. It just, how did this soil lose its ability to maintain moisture, to hold together, and superimpose on that the night when it happened and the memories of the neighborhood, of people in the neighborhood who remember things about that craft coming in and who remember the electricity in the neighborhood going out, and how that pattern fits other cases in other countries all over the world over the course of decades. A lot of good research in this area is not very sexy and it's not very exotic. It's about study, comparison, superimposition. What is similar, what is different from allegation to allegation, case to case. But when you asked the question, Gil, my mind went right to that skid mark in the yard. And it haunted me, really. I would have loved to have gone out to Kokomo and seen it, just for myself, that thing of, there it is, this is where it happened.
No, that was actually in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Copley Woods. And I don't know, some certain things are emblematic. They make other things real. They're the catalyst. They're the thing that pushes it over the edge for you. So again, if it was just that skid mark, or just Deb's word, or just the fact that, it was more than a year and a half or so before it got back to relative normal, the other witnesses and witnesses to actual, real, physical, remembered events, you can't think these things away. You can't dismiss them. And it's part of the problem for debunkers. It's part of the challenge for skeptics.
It reminds me of the Delphos, Kansas case, that ring that wouldn't absorb moisture.
Yeah, same thing.
That happened a long time ago, And as far as I know, it's still, when it snows, there's no snow in that circle.
I don't. My parents passed away, have passed away now, and the house was long sold. But before, when I was taking samples for Bud, I took a bunch of samples for myself, and I've kept them all these years. And I had them stashed in my cedar chest. And then after the tornado 2013 destroyed my house and took away most of my belongings.
Well, you just got all the luck, don't you?
I know. But the cedar chest survived, but it was tore up. But the stuff in the cedar chest survived, and I still have a whole bunch of samples of that dirt. I have a bunch of Ziploc baggies with the dates written on them, and the dirt, and they're still like clumps of rock, and they all look kind of weird. But I still have some samples if anybody wants to look at it.
I was going to say, now we know you're crazy because this weird lady keeps dirt in her cedar chest.
You know what? I don't know. When Bud asked me, to send him some soil samples, and I was about 100 pounds heavier than I am now, and I was out there with my dad's spade, jumping up and down in the spade, just barely busting up a dust here because the stuff was so hard. And I started finally getting some chunks up, and I thought, you know what? Something just came over me, and I'm like, I better just go on ahead and take some more. And I've just, everywhere I've moved in my life, I've toted these chunks of dirt with me, but I still have them. I just thought maybe someday they might be important. I don't know.
Well, it is.
Yeah. There are many cases in which I'm sure the people that were involved, either as experiencers or soil testers or both, wished they'd hung on to that evidence.
Well,
I see a question here relative to, have I seen any other kind of skid marks or similar physical manifestation of cases? Yes, I have, and more important, I've had access to other cases that I haven't seen, but that I have seen the laboratory results of the soil that was affected, and of course always in tandem with the accounts of the individual or individuals involved and any other supporting physical, anecdotal, photographic, or historic evidence. So yes, most definitely, this is not a one-time thing by any stretch.
Yeah, happens quite often. Debra, when did the use of the pseudonym Kathy Davis fully insulate you and your family? Did the use of the pseudonym Kathy Davis fully insulate you and your family the way you'd hoped it would?
More or less, yes. Of course, my face was out there with Bud on a few television shows, but not for very long. And people have, short memories. We had people coming to the house a couple of times before Intruders was even written. So how they even knew that the mark was there or to come and look. One time I remember my dad was sitting at the kitchen table that was the back of the house that he could look out his window and see the swimming pool and the mark in the yard, the side drive, his workshop. And someone pulls up along the side drive, goes back around the turnaround that I used, and then came back with the car aiming towards the front of the house, towards the back of the house. Dad could see him. They got out of their car and they ran over and took pictures of the mark in the yard, jumped back in their car and left before my dad could even get up out of his seat to go see who they were and what they were doing. And this was before Intruders was written. I mean, it was during the investigation, but before the book was published. Wow. And one time we got a phone call, and it wasn't too long after the incident happened, that it was the lady that lived next door to us, whose house was right next to us, but separated by some woods. And she called my mom and told my mom, she said, I know you guys I wanted to let you know that we saw someone in your backyard earlier today, and we didn't think you were home. And she said the man was driving a dark sedan, and he had on a suit, and he was carrying what looked like a briefcase, only it was big. And he went to your backyard, set the suitcase down, took some stuff out. She couldn't see what he was doing. He was there a few minutes, and then he took his suitcase, got back in his car, and left. And my mom's like, no one was supposed to come out here. We didn't have any plans for anybody to come out, you know? So the pseudonym obviously wasn't going to be helpful for whoever these folks were, but mostly, yeah, I think it served its purpose. And when I first decided that I was going to tell my own story, and you know, I'd been going around with Budd, and I always got the same questions from experiencers who would hear his talk and that would come up and talk to me later. They kept asking me the same kinds of questions. So I thought, you know what, I've been keeping a journal. I'm going to write this stuff down, and I'm going to write this book so that, you know, I can answer these folks' questions and try to help them out. And, but I decided that, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to tell my story, I need to put my name on it, because I feel like I need to own this, and I'm just going to have to suck it up. And if people don't like it, and if people I work with find out about it, and I catch some shit from them, they'll get over it. People have short memories, and I'll just ignore it. You know, I felt compelled to do this. And I also felt compelled to put my real name forward. My children were older at that point. You know, my parents and everybody was more comfortable with everything, and it had been pretty quiet. So I felt fairly safe and comfortable doing that. And I also figured, now if I come out with my real name and something crazy happens to me, you know, from somebody does something to me, then it'll be like validation even more so. And so I don't think, you know, anybody that's snooping around our yard, you know, in the beginning would want that kind of validation. So
did the neighbor that reported this dark sedan and the man in the suit mention what color the suit was?
I believe she said it was a black suit, or like a dark, you know, suit and tie kind of thing, but I can't remember right now exactly, but I believe it's just a dark suit. This neighbor is the one that Budd interviewed directly next to us, who said that night she saw this bright flash from the yard, and her whole house rumbled, and her TVs turned red. And then I think when Budd talked to her husband, I think he told Budd that when he came home, she was so petrified that he found her cowering somewhere, and that she was actually afraid someone was going to come and get her, that she was afraid someone was coming to get her. And the other woman that lived across the street from us that Budd interviewed was a night shift nurse at the local hospital. So she was still in bed asleep, but something woke her up. She told Budd it was like she thought an airplane was about to crash into her house. It was so loud and rumbly. And I think she mentioned something about power in part of the house, and maybe even clocks stopping in the front part of the house, which would be the closest to the mom and dad's house. This was that night. And then like 20 years later, he gets a letter after Intruders is written. He gets a letter from people who lived right behind us on the next street. This woman's son used to spend the night, have slumber parties with his friends out in the garage, and the garage actually faced the back of our house, but it was, you know, there was wooded area between us. And she told Budd that she couldn't say for sure it was exact date or not, but during this time period, she recalled them coming in screaming, having a cow, because they said there were like hundreds of basketball-sized balls of white light floating through the woods between our house and theirs. And it scared the shit out of these kids so bad they never slept in the garage again. And this was 20 years after the book came out that he got this letter. So, you know, there was witnesses. But yeah, I think the pseudonym served its purpose, but I felt that I needed to use my real name later on. And I don't regret it at all, not one bit.
I do have a follow-up question, but it just blows my mind how these men in black, for want of a better term, find out where witnesses who have not reported their sighting to anyone get to them, say, the following morning before they've had a chance to tell anyone, and say, you know, that thing that you saw last night was the planet Venus. Don't talk about this to anyone. That kind of thing. And I realize that's not exactly what happened in your case, but for someone that fits that description to come out and take photos or you know, just to note it happened at all before the book came out, while the investigation was going on, really
it's bizarre.
It freaks me out. It really
freaked
does.
us out. That's why we wanted to use pseudonyms. We already had that shit happening before the book was out. We couldn't imagine how crazy it might get. You know, even Copley Woods is a pseudonym. That's not really the name of where that happened. It happened in Indy, yeah, but it's not the name.
I figured that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of freaky shit, that's not really a great segue, but
now it fits here.
My mods will kill me if I don't promote my own stuff. So this is what you'll find at gillstore.com. I was as amazed as anyone that it was not taken. But you can get all kinds of Into the Fringe merch here, and I keep it at just pennies above cost. So I don't really make a lot of money on it, maybe a quarter, but it has the URL on the back. So it's sort of a thank you for me for being a walking billboard for my my channel, my shows. And we've got all different kinds of designs, and we've got all different sizes, and men's and women's, and even a coffee cup, if that's the kind of thing that you're into. So do visit gillstore.com and treat yourself and someone that you love to some weird shit. And back to our story. In my experience, there are two different kinds of experiencers out there. The ones that wish their contact experiences would stop, and the kind that don't. And what I recall is that something like 72% of them fall into the latter category, that they wish their experiences would not stop. Deb, if you could change things somehow so that none of your contact experiences would have happened, do you think you would?
No, I get asked this a lot. And while it was terrifying as I was going through it, and then when I was younger, you know, and if you'd have asked me this when I was 25, I'd have been like, yeah. But my life would not be it wouldn't be remotely like it is now had I not had these experiences, especially the June 30, 83 one, as scary as it was. I still worry that it's going to have some kind of effect on my health, you know, down the line more. I already have health issues, you know, we all have that when we hit my age, but if I hadn't had the experience, I wouldn't have met Budd. If I hadn't have met Budd changed my life in so many ways, even beyond this help. He took me under his wing and made me almost a part of his family. And he
Yeah.
gave me experiences that I would never have had I not met him, that have nothing to do with this stuff, like art. He exposed me to art and culture and things in New York that I would have never had, that changed the way I saw things. So he had such a major impact in my life. I heard Dr. Phil one time say that there are like 7 pivotal moments in your life, or defining moments, and meeting Budd was one of mine. Had I not met him, I wouldn't have met my late husband. I wouldn't be here where I live now. I wouldn't have the husband I have now. My kids wouldn't have gone to the school they went to, or met their spouses, or have I mean, I wouldn't have had the job I had. I mean, there would be nothing recognizable about the life that I have now had I not met Budd, and had I not had that experience in '83. It's pretty likely I would not have met him. And so, no. And also, honestly, I feel like having to learn how to go through the experience as I went through it in '83 and get through that trauma. I feel, and I've even had this discussion with my therapist now, because I go to therapy. I have still anxiety and PTSD about, things in my life. And she knows all about my book and my experiences and my life and this stuff. And she even agrees that she feels like this stuff that I went through, in '83 and the early stuff, probably is what helped me be strong enough to get through watching my husband kill himself, the tornado that dropped the house on me and took everything from me. I've been through things, non-paranormal, non-UFO, that a lot of people can never come back from. I've not only gotten through them, but I've gotten stronger and better because of them.
Yeah.
I see myself as a little pebble in a pouch on a slingshot, and every time life pulls me down, the farther down it pulls me, when it lets go, the farther up I go. And I feel like these early experiences that I had that were so traumatic to get through in my childhood and the June 30 '83, we've done some PTSD EMDR therapy on that June 30 '83 incident, has been tremendously helpful for me. But she feels like going through all that stuff has made me stronger. So again, another reason why I wouldn't change anything or wouldn't not have it. I'm not going to go out asking for it to come. I feel I feel now that it's a part of me. It's a part of my life. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of who I'm always going to be. And whenever it's time for it to come back in my life again, it will. And I will be here, and I'll deal with it. And whatever, is meant to be will be, and it'll be fine. I just tell myself, I've gotten through so much. I've gotten this far. I'm still alive. I'm better than ever. I'll be fine. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. So.
Very good. And Peter, you had kind of a knowing look on your face as she was describing her answer. So I wanted to kind of toss to you to see if you had anything to add.
Not really. Deb said it all, and better than I could ever. You had asked earlier about the miniseries Intruders, which, although it's impossible to find a really good quality print of the film unless, I guess, you have a VHS copy or one that's been made into transferred to a DVD format. It's on YouTube, and it's Intruders, the miniseries, and it's still worth watching. Special effects are modest.
I have the DVD. I watched it when it aired, and I still think it's a very powerful film.
Yes, it is, and there are many fine performances in it. As is often the case when a book or books are optioned for film or television, it goes in one end and comes out the other end like sausage, with not a lot of recognizable aspects of the original. In this case, when Budd was first approached about the optioning it for a film or miniseries, the option was already out being considered by someone else. And so CBS picked up the option on Missing Time, Budd's first book. And then the option for Intruders came back and they picked that one up. And I liked it. I found it very entertaining in a respectable way about the subject. Budd had a lot more issues than I did, in great part because he's the author of the book. And, you know, there's a part of the story that has nothing whatsoever in any way, shape, or form or manner to do with the story. But it's cool. And it's an interesting subplot, and it has to do with the character played by the wonderful actor Ben Vereen, who was a guard, you know, on a crash UFO site, and essentially was institutionalized to keep him away from the public. And he should have gotten an Emmy for that. It was very poignant and so powerful. And Richard Crenna, who was a wonderful actor, you know, he started out in light television comedy as a teenager in a show called Our Miss Brooks in the 50s.
I didn't know that.
Became a legitimate television star with a situation comedy, I guess in the earlier 60s, called The Real McCoys. But he did a detective series, real hard-boiled stuff for years, and he was a well-trained method actor. And he spent several days with Budd. And at that time that they were going into production, John Mack had become involved in the field. And so I think, as Deb will agree, you know, the character is sort of, it's Budd in there, but it's John in there, and then some invention and confabulation. They certainly weren't going to make him into a painter. You know, he's kind of a renegade psychiatrist. And
actually, now that you mention it, it does seem like a composite of both Budd and John Mack.
Yeah, and that's in part the work of the great Tracy Torme, who is a wonderful screenwriter and brilliant at bringing these stories to the fore on film. I got, you know, so much of it is subjective, and for me, the warmth and the genuine concern of the Crenna character, the, you know, Hopkins character, was very real. Budd's was driven by a real curiosity for what was going on here, like so many of us are, whether we've had it happen or not. What the hell is this about? Who are these beings? Why are they doing this? Where do they come from? All that myriad of questions. But over time, I observed something happen with Budd, and we met, gosh, 5 years before his very first, more than 5 years before his very first book came out, when he was just becoming involved in the subject in the more or less mid-70s. And over time, though, his major concern became a concern about these people that were going through this, rather than all of, you know, the dreamy stuff about where do they come from and what do they have for breakfast and what do their ships run on and all that great stuff, which is legitimate and which we'll always be interested in. But I have to say, at this point in my life, as an investigative writer and somebody who is in the work, my day-to-day concerns and interests are more around how this impacts on the lives of real people, rather than who are they, where do they come from, etc. And that is given over to the character very well. Also, I've tried to imagine at times what it must have been like to be Deb when this thing came out and was a miniseries on friggin' CBS. And not only that, but
bizarre.
You've got a brilliant actress, Mare Winningham, who still does character work, and she is always spot on. She's just a wonderful actress. And I remember asking Deb about the impact of this on her life at the time, because all of a sudden, you're not just the subject of an international best-selling book, you're being played by like a famous actress in something that's not stuck away in a weird corner of TV land. This is major
Yeah.
network television. Millions, probably tens of millions of people saw it in first run. And I was
sure.
very moved when you told me that essentially your friends, your neighbors, your family basically protected you. It wasn't like everybody's out there saying, oh, you know, she lives at that house, the woman that CBS thing was made on. Just the opposite. It's, you're good with us, and you know,
I
we
was
got your back.
I was so blessed. I had so much support and love from family, friends, neighbors, even my boss at work, coworkers, you know. They were very protective of me because they knew what I had been through. Some of them had experienced weird stuff with me. They knew it was true.
Yeah.
You know, Mayor Winningham actually called me a few times and asked me how I thought she should play certain scenes.
Brilliant.
And I really appreciated that. I actually, you know, I found old voice, you know, remember the old answering machines that used to have the tapes on them?
Yeah.
I found one and it had Mayor's message to me on it, and with her phone number, and my mother. I mean, everyone on this audio tape that I found from this old answering machine had either passed away, or it was, you know, it was Mayor Winningham, and so I still actually have it. But yeah, I was surprised that she cared that much. And when I watched the miniseries, you know, there was a lot of stuff in it that wasn't in the book, that wasn't mine. But the scenes that I recognized from the book, she did a great job as me. And I was grateful that she cared enough to want to do it right. And while I didn't like having to explain to people who would come up to me later, they'd come up to me and say, oh, I saw the miniseries and the same thing happened to me and this and that. And I'd have to say, that really didn't happen to me. That was part of the composite, you know, Hollywood thing.
That Tracy came up with.
And I felt bad about that. And it annoyed me when I was younger. But as I got older, I realized, you know, it was a wonderful thing because it was one of the first things I ever saw about the subject that didn't have a bunch of hokey music and laugh tracks and goofy shit like that on it. Yeah. And they actually took it seriously. And that meant a lot to me. And I appreciated it. And the older I got, the more I appreciated that fact. That I think that was a very important miniseries on TV that, like you said, reached millions of people. And I think that was very pivotal time. And I'm grateful for it now, but it was bizarre watching Mayor Winningham cut out of a scene out of the book that was about my life that I had lived through. And I was like, what the fuck?
It was surreal.
It was very surreal. It was bizarre. And like, I'm thinking, you know, it reminds me of the time I was in Budd's studio and all these boxes were around me and he was showing me letters. He's like, see, this person had this experience like you. They're just describing exactly. And I had this epiphany while I'm looking at these boxes. And I said to him, I was in one of these boxes. Why was my letter the one you read and decided to investigate? Why was our story the one that you wrote a book about, you know, and we're writing a book about? And he's like, well, you know, kid, as he used to call me kid, he'd say, well, kid, that's the $64,000 question. That's what he said to me. And he kind of chuckled. And I said, yeah, I think it was fate. And he goes, maybe. I don't think he very believed.
He really didn't answer your question, huh?
No, he didn't. You know, it just, but here we were, you know, and I'm even to this day so grateful and thankful that I had him so much. I got a lot of his time and of him because I got him early on in his career as a writer and an investigator. After Intruders came out, I mean, he exploded and people were pulling him 1,000 ways. And I had to let go of him as much as I hated to because other people needed him. I was doing fine, you know. So
ironically, my life changed a lot right around that time as well, because having worked for him for years part-time, not quite overnight, but in a relatively lively time frame, he became much more a central figure in international UFO studies, with sometimes several hundred letters coming in a week. Remember, this is all pre-digital, and he would have me answer pretty much every letter, even if it was just with a one-sentence note, but it went out in the mail. And Deb, you've reminded me, I've forgotten whether or not this was invention, confabulation, real experience. I didn't care. I just thought it was one of the most incredibly effective moments in the miniseries, and it's when your character, being played by Mare, is hectically making breakfast, and the toast starts to burn, and she looks, and there's the 2 eggs in the frying pan looking back at her, and I thought, shit,
That happened.
that's good. That's scary as hell. That's it. There you go.
Those sort of things happen to me. Yeah. I saw the two black eyes superimposed over the mark in the yard the first time I saw that mark in the yard. I couldn't get them out of my head.
Yep.
The part that still resounds with me, but especially when I saw it, the first time when it ran, was the repairmen in the yard that all turned.
Good point. Yeah.
At the same time, and were wearing the big wraparound sunglasses, and in one motion walked toward the house, and it scared the shit out of me. And not long after that, the house that I lived in was on the corner, and the phone junction box for the neighborhood was on that property. And I remember at 3:30 in the morning or something like that, just feeling like I needed to look out the window. Sometimes we have these urges and we have to follow them, it's important for some reason. And I did, and there was a group of 4 telephone repair men by themselves, away from the junction box or a van or anything, just standing there. Now, they didn't turn around and walk in the house and through the wall, but boy, after having watched Intruders, that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah. I think it scares the shit out of a lot of people.
And Gap Stargate says, what was the name of the miniseries? Is it out on DVD? It's called Intruders. And if I weren't in the middle of moving to a new location here in town, where I have all my books and CDs already and DVDs, I'd pop it out and show it to you. But it is called Intruders, and it is out on DVD. You can pick it up on Amazon for, I think, $7.99 or something like that.
Make sure it's the one with Richard Crenna and Mare Winningham, because there's another Intruders out there now I've seen, but it's not us. It's a different story. I don't even know what it's about.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask, I think Canadian Spider-Man is our mod for tonight that's going to help us with the giveaway and spinning the wheel. But while we're waiting for whichever mod it's going to be to join us, I wanted to ask you, Peter, if there was anything that over the course of tonight's show that has come to your mind in regards to Deb or Intruders or Budd that we haven't touched on that we should.
only that it underscores for me how real this phenomena is, and how genuinely much a part of the actual lives of real people, some of whom you may know, who live with this as the center of their secret life, because they are not interested in the potential ridicule that it might bring down on them. They are simply not comfortable discussing it with other people for reasons I think we can all understand, or wondering when it's going to happen to them again next. This is one of countless stories. It happens to be one of the best researched and the best told. And the central figure is somebody I love very much, have tremendous respect and admiration for, and always will, and will always consider a dear friend, but who re-inspires me with what I would call everyday courage to just keep out there, and by her very presence, being a living example of that, this happens to people as real as you, as me, people that you know, people that you love, people that you wouldn't guess it has happened to, but it does. I would only close on the note of saying, read Deb's memoir, read the book Intruders, see the miniseries. Again, it's somewhat dated. It's unsophisticated by comparison to a lot of more recent films and television treatments about the subject. We're talking the early 1990s here, but it is a pioneering work. And hats off to CBS back in the day when, we were all still turning the television channels like that, or with our big ass channel changer.
Clicker.
This was another time, and it's a story extremely well told. But here we have an opportunity not just to meet the individual behind it, but to read her account, to read the story by Budd Hopkins that set it all in motion, see the proof for yourself, and let it all sink in, and take it seriously and assist other people in doing the same thing.
And Deb, same question to you. Anything that you can think of that over the course of tonight's show we haven't touched on, but that we should have?
Well, the part of a big part of Intruders and a big part of my book and part of the miniseries was the missing pregnancy that I had, which was the most difficult part for me to talk about. And the last part, Budd had to convince me to let him put in Intruders. Once we decided Intruders would be written, I didn't want that part in it because it was painful, and I knew how crazy it sounded. Yeah. But it was a part of it. There was some reason why I started thinking about it again after the June 30, 83 incident. And I do have some really weird memories and dreams connected to this missing pregnancy that I had. The pregnancy was legit, and I have the doctor visits to prove that I was pregnant and then wasn't pregnant. And I have the old medical records handwritten because, I'm pretty old, but it is a part of my story. It's a part of my life. And sometimes I get a chance to talk about it when I do an interview. Sometimes I don't, but anybody who's read the book or seen the miniseries knows about it. And I hope that other women who've had these weird pregnancies that disappeared, will maybe read my story or see the miniseries and feel more comfortable talking about that part too. Because I know for me, that was the last thing I wanted to talk about in public. Nobody wants to talk about it because at the end of the day, I lost a baby, and that's something that's personal and painful. So
traumatic. Yeah. Do you remember by any chance what the doctors said?
Yes, I do. Well, when my mom took me back to the doctor after the negative pregnancy test, he took us into his office. My mom and I were there, and he says to me, you're young, you're going to have other kids. We see this sometimes. I remember him saying that, and he says, it happens. My advice to you is to just forget this ever happened. And I thought, how am I going to forget the last 3 months of my life when I thought I was going to be a mother, and I didn't really want to get pregnant, but then accepted it. We were going to get married in June, and we moved our wedding up to April so I wouldn't be huge. This was a different time than the before. So no, I'm never going to forget this. Even my mom, I remember asking the doctor, does she need a DNC, for God's sake? And he's like, no, everything looks completely normal. And later had what I called dreams of seeing this child. And that is, I think, the last scene in the miniseries. And that's the scene that Mare wanted to make sure she played correctly, and she did. And that's why I was so grateful.
And did the doctor refer to it as a false pregnancy?
No, he didn't refer to it as anything other than sometimes this happens.
Wow.
We see
And
this.
best to forget about it.
Yeah, you're young, you'll have other kids.
And did you get the idea that when he said we see this from time to time, that he was on the money? Or
I was a teenager. I was still stunned at the fact that I was no longer pregnant. So, no,
but with the passage of time, now looking back on it, when you think about that experience, do you think that he had any inkling of why the fetus had just disappeared?
No, I don't think so. I think that they just he said it like it was. They see it happen and they don't know what it is, but you're okay, so just forget about it. I mean, I really don't. Yeah, I don't
strange thing for a doctor to say, especially the forget about it part.
Maybe now, but this was 44 years ago. So
yeah,
this was a long time ago.
Let me bring in my good friend and moderator, Canadian Spider-Man.
Hello.
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 Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, fantastic show. Wow. Yeah, great to hear you both. Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate
Gil,
that.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Do we have our spinner wheel ready to go?
Yes, we do. I'm just going to share the stream with you now. If you're ready, yep, ready to go.
Okay. Do we have all of our entrants on there?
Let me confirm with Jill, but as of 60 seconds ago, she had said, yeah, this was the latest.
Mr. MH is here. Murdog is here. And of course, all attending mods like Gap Stargate and Darius Munchausen and Antiderivative Jill and you should be on the wheel.
Yep. Yeah, she made sure I was, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Mr. MH has just joined us as well.
And we have OO Govan 00. Oh, hi, Fred.
Wow.
You can just put Fred if you want.
Yacht is the wheel that I have currently doesn't have the latest people that just joined us.
Can you enter them manually?
Jill has the wheel, but I can see if I can do that right now. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Yes, I can. Yep, I will do it. Yeah. So if you do, you mind, Cardinalson, reading the names, and I'll type them in right now.
Sure. Yeah, we have Fred.
Fred. Okay.
And we have Mr. H.
All right, Fred is in. Mr. M.H., yes, of course.
And we have
Mr. H is
Murdog.
in. I'm sorry?
Murdog, M-U-R-D-O-G.
Murdog, D-O-G, yep, okay.
And Tolfer wanted to make sure that he was on the wheel.
Tolfer is on, definitely. Would you like to put him on twice? Maybe we should, eh?
No, I think once is plenty.
Okay.
And
Yep.
we'll go ahead and get that wheel into the show when you are ready, and you can share your screen.
Okay. How's that working for you?
That looks good.
All right.
So when you're ready, go ahead and give it a spin.
All right, here we go.
Congratulations, Tolfer.
Congratulations, Topher. I guess
It's
we
not
didn't
really
need
the
to put
same
him in
without the
twice.
sound, but
I had the sound up.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't very loud. Sorry.
that's all right. Well, thanks very much for helping us out with that.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Continue on, and yeah, thanks for letting me spin that.
And
We'll stop sharing.
Tolfer, if you will get in touch with me so that I can
Too.
get that information to Deb, then we'll get that information over so that she can autograph it and send it out. And the message says, Deb's book is amazing. If you don't win, just go get it.
Yep.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you.
Which
Agreed.
is kind of the whole point. Yeah. And next week on Into the Fringe, we're going to have a good friend of the show, Albert Rosales, with his humanoid encounters. And we have all kinds of people booked throughout the month. So do be here, same time, same channel. And I do want to thank both of you for making our second Abduction Roundtable as meaningful and important as it has been. And of course, I look forward to having you both back on when we can.
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate the opportunity.
As
Yeah.
well as I do. And with that, I will go ahead and sign off. It's Cardinal Sin.